Martinez, as has been alluded to now several times, you and a group of other senators from both parties tried but failed to get a compromise on immigration policy through the Senate several years ago. Why do you think the Senate was able to pass a compromise last year, but what do you think the holdup is in the House?
Well, look, I think the circumstances of 2006 and 7 and this year are slightly different. One of the issues that really was very, very difficult to get past in those days was the issue of border security. There was just a sense in the country that we had not done enough to secure our border. And there was a post-9/11 mentality where it felt like that was really an important thing to accomplish. No question that that is a key element of any immigration reform bill. We have done a ton on border security. The increase in border patrols, the non-person, but the electronic means of surveillance, barriers that have been built, fence that was built, some places where it was needed, other places where it just felt good to do it. And so border security is in a very different place from where it was today. Back in 6 and 7, there was a lot of opposition from Republicans, but there was also a ton of opposition from Democrats. Some of them, frankly, included a senator from Illinois. There was a discomfort in the labor movement with any type of a guest worker program. This time around, the chamber and the labor unions came into some accord. By the way, this is how legislation happens in Washington, and I know Derek would find it wrong that everybody kind of got a little bit into it, but that's how you move legislation forward, is you get the disparate people to come together to reach compromises that advance the ball. So the chamber and the labor unions, which is not an easy group to bring together, made some understandings of how a guest worker program should work. The farm workers and the ag growers also reached some consensus on an ag portion of the bill. And I think in general, there was just a greater sense that there had been a lot done to secure the border. A lot more was done in this particular bill. And I think the political climate has changed somewhat. I don't think that there's quite the vitriol and the rhetoric, and I think there's a greater understanding that for the good of the country, something needs to be done to resolve this problem. And so I think those were the key differences. And I think in terms of the House, I think there's a window of opportunity here in the next 2 or 3 months where the House might do something more in keeping with what Derek would suggest, which is smaller piecemeal bills. I know that Congressman from Miami, Mario Diaz-Balart, is working on a bill to regularize status. I know that there's some thoughts on additional things for the border, but I think there's also the thought that perhaps we can do something on Dreamers, we can do something with those that serve in the military. So there's a number of proposals that are percolating on the House. I know Speaker Boehner, and if it was any mistake about that a week or so ago, he sort of expressed his feelings pretty candidly in Ohio, that he really wants to get a bill done. He'd like to get a bill out. And so I think there's a window of opportunity here in the near future, and I hope that something can be done that I think would be good for the country as well.
Any other thoughts on that?
I would just add one thing. It's not clear that the border is secure. If you talk to the folks who patrol the border on a daily basis, they will tell you there's still a lot of people coming across the border illegally. But even more importantly, the border isn't the problem. The border is the symptom of the problem. And until we create disincentives for people to come into the United States illegally, you're going to continue to have that pressure at the border. What we need in this country is not just border security, and we need that for other reasons besides simply illegal immigration. What we need are reasons for people not to come, and that starts with an employment verification system, making the E-Verify system universal. Jobs are the #1 attraction that bring people to the United States illegally, and as long as you send the message that is, the employer can look at some Social Security card that you bought on the street corner and say, looks good to me, and hire you, that incentive to come to the United States to get a job is going to remain. So what we need to do is systematically remove those incentives, the ability to get a job in this country illegally, the ability to get non-essential, non-emergency benefits and services like the DREAM Act once you get to the United States. If you give people a reason not to come, that's when you can actually secure the border with the resources that are available. You wouldn't have to spend $46 billion to do it.
If I may, I think something I failed to mention is the issue of interior enforcement, because 40% of all those that are in this country illegally did not cross the border. They came in an airport, they came in a port, and they're here. And they're here, and they're 40% of that illegal population, and so that is also an issue that ought to be addressed in fairness. And let me just say that I think it's really a sort of coming together when we think about the fact that, you know, E-Verify is part of the Senate bill. I think that's part of what, you know, there's a consensus we should do. Is it going to be perfect? No. I think part of making the border secure is having a guest worker program so that people can come in a legal basis to fulfill the labor needs that this country very legitimately has. And by the way, that is at two ends of the spectrum. At the STEM level, at the high tech, I mean, the Silicon Valley firms are desperate to be able to get in people who have come to this country to get a degree, to stay here, to work here, to benefit our society, to start businesses like so many immigrants have done. And then at the other end of the spectrum, where there's a certain labor need that I don't care what our unemployment is, but, you know, the pizca naranjas, I think only there's a certain group of people that pick oranges, and I think it's not usually the unemployed in this country. So there are certain jobs where the immigrants provide the labor, and those jobs are going to always be filled by that labor force. What we need to do is provide a vehicle where there can be circularity, where they can come, they can work, they can return to their families, they can help provide for their families. And so I think, you know, when you talk about disincentives, it kind of worries me as to how far we take the disincentives. If you're just talking about E-Verify, we can do that. Now, disincentives could be, you know, something more draconian, and then I may wonder about that. But I think E-Verify is a fair thing for our country.
Okay, Ben.
Yeah, I just think that if we are talking about disincentives as the ones that we're talking on the campaign during 2012, which was self-deportation, making our lives so that we can find a way back home, I think that we have tried those laws, have not worked. California is one example, 187 back in the date. Arizona is another one of those laws. Quite frankly, the time is now. We have 11 million families living in the fear of not being able to see their parents coming back home after a hard work day. What can we tell a young kid? The pop was returned home by the immigration because we were not able to fix the system. I have heard a lot in the last 20 years about the problem of the issue of immigration reform, but very few solutions. We do have a solution to date in the Senate, and we do have a solution to date in the House. We just need a vote. And I just think that we cannot just do one piece at a time. If they do one piece at a time, at the end of the day, what we need is the meal, the complete meal. And that means we cannot just do immigration reform by sealing the borders, because it's not going to happen. Nor we can do immigration reform by just chasing people out of the comfort of living in this country and contributing to this country. We need to do all together, and I think we can do it. It's been done already with bipartisan support in the Senate, and it's a bill pending for a vote in the House that if the majority leader allows to do it, we can pass it.
Derek.
I think we should be very careful to think about future incentives as well, which I think was part of the point that Ira was getting to, which is in 1986, we tried this similar approach where members of Congress said, the floor manager for the bill said, I promise you this is a one-time only amnesty. It's going to happen this one time. And then we're going to get our act together. We're going to have workplace enforcement and border security and all the rest. We're not going to have to do this again. It's one time only. And that was in 1986, and it was an amnesty of about 3 million people. And then here we are today with the population maybe around 11 million or so. And I think that if we were to pass another legalization, another amnesty, that we would see more incentive to come again to think, well, if I go there long enough, eventually there will be another round of amnesty. So you're really making a signal that the laws aren't that important when you do an amnesty, particularly another time after we've already said we were only going to do it once.
Okay. Senator.
You want to continue? Okay. Well, I would say, by the way, that no one in any of the proposals is talking about amnesty. To me, amnesty means you committed a violation of law, whether it's a crime or just a civil violation, but you committed some wrong, and then amnesty would say, like 86 said, let's just forget about it, don't worry about it, you're here, no problem. The Senate bill or any of the proposals being considered, the ones that were considered back when I was in the Senate or even now, all have a series of fairly severe penalties. We're talking about fines. We're talking about learning English. We're talking about citizenship classes. We're talking about a criminal record that be clean. I mean, there's a ton of barriers that are put there. So to say any of these things are amnesty and any sort of a regularization would be amnesty is to suggest that there's no proportionality when there is a criminal conduct or conduct that's in discord with the law. There has to be proportionality. When someone crosses the border illegally to feed their family, that is not a crime to which the only solution is deportation. You cannot deport 11 million people. It is impractical, it's inhumane, and it's too costly. So when I hear my friends say, you know, we got to find a solution, and whether Obama will enforce the law or not, or whether we, it's not now, we should do it later, or we should do something in favor of the American people, what I haven't heard from the folks who really don't think we should do anything is, what do we do about the people that are here now? What are we going to do about that? I know self-deportation is not something we should ever talk about again. I mean, that just was not a good thing to say, obviously, and I think there's a fairly strong political consensus that that's not an answer. So then what is the answer? What do we do with the people that are here?
Okay.
I just wanted to, 2 points I want to make. Our current spending is at $18 billion on enforcement. And so I think it's clear that we just can't keep throwing money at the problem because it's not solving it. And the other issue is, too, that employment isn't the only reason why immigrants come to the United States. History will show us that people come for other reasons: poverty, violence, drugs, the weapons that come from the United States into Mexico. NAFTA, for example, displaced millions of workers. And so I think that in whatever we craft, we need to take that into consideration and recognize the root causes, and also look to the United States not creating conditions in other countries that force people out and come to the United States for those reasons.
Just a quick note on why I would use the term amnesty respectfully is there were provisions also in 1986 where you needed to learn English and so forth. And, Gerald Ford pardoned, and he called it an amnesty, Vietnam-era draft dodgers, and they had work requirements that they had to do, actually. They had community service requirements and so forth. It was widely recorded as an amnesty. It doesn't mean that, I guess there's different degrees and so forth, and then there's the whole question, too, of whether you would do citizenship in addition to a legal status also. But it is a forgiveness of whatever the law said. It is a lowering of the penalty. So I think it is fair to use that term.
Let's take a break now and go into the audience to Rafael.
Hello? Okay. By the way, I want to apologize in advance. If you see me doing this, it's a discreet signal to Paul, and also means that Sheriff Danny Mims is here in the hall, so let's be careful. Okay, we have the first question here.
Shall I stand up?
Yes, and your name, please.
My name is Zoe Adams. I live here in the US. I'm from the UK originally. I've been here for 10 years. I live here on a visa known as an E2 Treaty Investor Visa. The visa requires that we invest money into a business, a small business. We employ US citizens, but the visa currently does not lead to any possibility of applying for a green card. We kind of think it's a little bit of an anomaly of the system that we feel we're the only group that are asked to invest quite heavily, but don't have an opportunity to stay here long term. As I've said quite a number of times, why would you bring everything to a country, start a business, expand the business, take on new employees, and then suddenly be, oh, hang on a minute, now I need to leave. We have been lobbying for quite a long time in Washington. We have got to a higher level than we ever have before. We've been meeting with some of the people from the Subcommittee on Immigration. And, you know, we hope that if immigration goes forward, that we will be part of the whole system. That's one side of our story. The other side is our children. Our children are no longer covered by the parents' visa when they reach 21. So they have really very few options to stay. If they're in college, they can go onto an international student visa, but what happens when they graduate? They could possibly start a business of their own, but they've never had a social security number while they've been children, so they have no experience and, you know, probably aren't going to get that visa. Or they get married, like my daughter did, for the right reasons, I will say. But, you know, our children need to be helped as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I think what we're
Okay.
getting at is that there is this visa that applies to investors in the United States, and does that need to be part of immigration, an immigration overhaul, and what needs to be done? Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I certainly do, but I'm happy for.
Yeah, I do too. You know, I think the question goes to the very root of the problem here, is that we have an immigration system that doesn't really make any sense. In 1965, we established a system that was based almost entirely on family chain migration. That the primary reason why we admit people to the United States is not because we objectively see them as people who are likely to contribute, but they happen to be related to somebody who came here before. And I think everybody would agree that the nuclear family ought to stay together, that when you come to the United States as an immigrant, you can bring a spouse, you can bring unmarried minor children to the United States. But what we have done is we've opened that up to just endless chains of extended families. And that basically shuts out other people. What we need to do is also reform our legal immigration policy and say, look, we are going to select people based on what we consider to be the likelihood of their contribution to the United States. And if it's somebody who is likely to start a business and employ Americans, that's probably a pretty good reason to admit them. But, you know, at the same time, when people do come here, even under the existing condition, as system as broken as it is, you stipulated to the conditions that you're going to come here, you're going to be able to stay, and these are the conditions. Your children are not going to be able to stay, apparently under the visa that you're talking about, and you can choose to accept it or not accept it. You know, we keep saying, dealing with people who haven't abided by their agreement with the United States. They have come here and then turned around and said, you know, now we want you to change it to accommodate us. And yes, we do need to change the system. We need to reform the legal immigration process as well as dealing with illegal immigration. But once people accept the conditions under which they're admitted, they should be expected to live up to those.
I would just add that a lot of times stories like yours get really buried with the controversy over legal status for those who are unauthorized immigrants now. And it's really unfortunate that the main proponents now for legislation seem to be almost holding everything hostage to that one provision. We can't fix the legal system unless we get everything completely fixed. I think that's the unfortunate thing. For every one unauthorized immigrant, there are 3 immigrants or people waiting in line to come legally. And so when you're talking about this immigration system being broken, it makes sense for a lot of reasons to fix the immigration system and to follow up on those promises that were made, and again, build trust over time that, okay, we're finally going to enforce our laws. Now how do we get onto the really difficult questions of what do we do with those who are here unauthorized fashion?
But, you know, I would make the observation that in her situation, and I'm not saying specifically her family, but people in that situation, it's an invitation to illegal stay. Because you take a 21-year-old that has lived here all his life, this is the only country he knows, this is where his friends are, that he's now going to self-deport himself out of the country at age 21 when he no longer can be under the umbrella of the family visa. And I would say then that person is going to stay here illegally, and that is an invitation to illegality, which is part of why we not only have to deal with those that, but you also have to deal with the ones that are here. So her problem bleeds into the problem you say is the only one we're focused on. You got to reform, I personally believe, the entire system. And you know, Ira and I might not have that big a difference when it comes to E-Verify, or when it comes to the fact that chain migration ought to not be the only way in which we do this in the future. It ought to be in the self-interest of the country. Of course it should be. But part of that is to take care of those that are already here. Because you see, our country lived under a system where everyone knew there was illegal entry coming into the country. It wasn't until 9/11 that that really became an issue, and it wasn't until the economic downturn that anybody really worried about it. So at some point we began to worry about illegal people being in the country. After for about 20 years, we didn't worry about it, and we welcomed them because we needed the labor. And so now we've had a problem, and in order to deal with that broken system, that problem, we have to come up with solutions that are imperfect. If it was only perfect, then we would not worry about the 11 million, 9 million, however many there are. And by the way, something else we should recognize when we talk about future flow. In my opinion, the guest worker program would be very important to that future flow. But I also have to tell you, when you travel to Mexico, Mexico today is not the Mexico of 10 years ago. Mexico is a thriving country with a terrific economy where unemployment has been at times in the last 5 years lower than it is in this country, and the day is going to come when our country is going to be desperate for immigrants to change the demographics of this country as us baby boomers continue to age, to fill the jobs that are going to be needed, because this country is going to have a resurgence in manufacturing brought about by our energy revolution that we're in the cusp of, if it's allowed to take full fruit. And when that occurs and manufacturing returns and the economy is back at full employment, we're going to be wishing people were coming to this country to do the labor that we're going to need. The difference between the United States, the difference between a decay in Japan and a decay in Europe and the United States is that there's so many of us in this room who have come to this country to add our energy, to add our labor, to add our ingenuity, our know-how, and our gumption to invest in this country, as the lady has done, to create jobs in this country, and to be part of this future. And that future undoubtedly will be better off by the fact that we have a normalized system of migration, and that 11 million people that are here can feel like they're part of this country, that they can be a part of the American dream, that they're not a set-apart group of people. We never have had factionalism in this country. You know, it goes back to the very beginnings of our country when immigrants began to come to America. The complexity of this country has changed. Who is an immigrant to this country has changed. America hasn't changed. I didn't make America Cuban. I became an American. Now, Miami may be a little different.
I'm going to move on to a question for Derek, but I wanted to acknowledge that State Representative Brian Nelson from Apopka is also joining us today, so thank you for being here. Derek, the Heritage Foundation, your organization, estimated in a report last year that citizenship for unauthorized immigrants would cost trillions of dollars in additional government benefits and services. So how does that conclusion square with the Congressional Budget Office estimate that the Senate bill would actually cut the deficit nearly $200 billion over the next decade and $700 billion in the following decade?
Thank you very much for asking. So there's three differences: method, the time frame, and the scope. So the method is different. What Robert Rector did, he's one of the nation's top experts on welfare programs and social spending, is he looked at the current unlawful or unauthorized population and looked at exactly how much are they paying in taxes, and that includes things like their portion of property taxes, their portion of the corporate tax, because the unauthorized do pay taxes. And so we calculated all of that, and then we also calculated how much are unauthorized immigrants paying in government services and benefits, and we calculated all of those up. And then as to the time restriction, we looked at the whole lifetime of the unauthorized population. And so that's the whole life cycle. That includes retirement costs and so forth, which are very expensive. Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid, or Medicare, are very expensive. For every dollar you put in, you're getting multiple dollars back, particularly if you're in a lower income status, which tends to be more common in the unauthorized community. And then also the last is the scope. So our study looked at local, state, and federal programs, not just federal programs. So CBO is the scorekeeper for Congress and for the federal government, but nobody had looked at, well, what's the effect on all levels of government? And that's what we did over the lifetime of that population. That's why we got that larger number.
Well, is there not a difference in dynamic and static scoring? That gets very technical, but I think it makes a big difference, as I understand, in the conclusions that you all reached.
Yeah, our study had some dynamic elements to it. So we, for example, if you looked at the data from 1986, you can see that the unauthorized workers' wages would increase somewhat. So we increased the wages by 5% after legalization, for example. We had a couple of other dynamic elements to it, but we did not make it as an economic model, which is part of what CBO did. Ours was very much counting up taxes, counting up benefits, and not considering the macroeconomic effects to the same extent that CBO did. So that's true. That's no difference.
I have a question for Ira, because you brought it up during your introduction. What impact do you believe a path to citizenship for unauthorized immigrants would have on American workers and on American taxpayers?
Well, you know, Senator Martinez mentioned that, you know, one of the reasons we ought to be considering immigration reform is to address our labor needs in this country. and that, we have some kind of impending labor shortage here in the United States. And I think if you look at all the evidence around us, we don't have a labor shortage in the United States. The United States may lack for a lot of things, but an ample supply of labor certainly isn't one of them. We have historically high levels of unemployment here in the United States. The 6.3% unemployment rate actually isn't the real unemployment rate. If you look at the U6 numbers, it's much, much higher. Anybody who has been listening to NPR recently, they've been doing an entire series about the fate of the millennial generation. Unemployment among millennials is in the double digits. These are our future workers. These are the best educated kids who've ever come out of the American school system. And, they're working at Starbucks being baristas rather than putting their degrees to work in real productive industries here in the United States. Bill Gates, a couple of months ago, was speaking, I believe it was at the American Enterprise Institute, where he said, we are going to have less and less need for labor here in the United States, that a lot of jobs that are now done by human beings are going to be done by mechanization in the future. So this idea that we somehow need lots and lots of workers to deal with future labor shortages simply isn't true. All we are doing is undermining the existing labor force here. We have, about 62% of working-age adults in the labor force. That is a vast, untapped pool. What we need to do is create incentives for companies to go out there and invest in American workers. The United States government isn't a personnel agency. Hey, send me 20 workers, I need them by next Tuesday. No, it should be the responsibility of corporate America to go out there among the 38% of the adults who are not in the labor force and try to bring them up to speed, get them the skills that they need so that they can participate fully in the labor force. All we are going to do through amnesty for illegal immigrants and through the massive increases in new immigration that the Senate bill calls for is further put American workers behind the 8 ball here. We are going to exacerbate the income inequality in this country. Any commodity, including labor, where there's an abundant supply, the price is going to go down. And if you look at what has happened to American workers over the past 40 years, the only logical conclusion you can come to is that we already have too many workers here in the United States. So, if we wake up 20 years from now and discover, yeah, there really is a labor shortage, well, then we can do something 20 years from now. But to go through this so-called immigration reform process that brings in lots and lots of workers at a time when we don't need them because we might need them 20 years from now simply doesn't make any sense for the country.
Can I?
Yeah, Ben.
Sorry, Senator, but
No, go
I'm
ahead.
going to try
Please,
to
please go ahead.
figure this out here. I mean, quite frankly, I just think that this is false in terms of considering that the community in the immigration community, we not only bring our talents, we bring more jobs to this country. I can tell you for a fact that there's a lot of industries in this country that would not be able to survive without the workforce of the community. That's for sure. I mean, I can go to the hotel industry. I can go to the building industry. I can also go to the farming. I mean, it's like agriculture. So there is a lot of jobs, and not only that. Let's make no mistake. The growth of the community is not based on the people that are coming from other countries. And if we don't fix our immigration reform now, and we do it in a way that we take care of the people that is here, the unfair advantages that we experience with the employers, taking advantage of those who don't have documents, I can testify to that. I was taken advantage by an unscrupulous employer, that we need to take that away.
I agree with
And
you.
we can do it with this immigration reform that is in the Senate. We can do it with the immigration reform proposal that is already in the House. It's not ignoring that, because quite frankly, none of us in this room, nor in this panel, want to see America fail. We want to see America prosperous, because my kids and my grandkids live in this country, and I want to live a better country, the one that I adopted as mine.
Just one note on the benefits side. Undocumented labor has cushioned the Social Security and saved Social Security by the tune of $12 billion. And this is a stat from the Social Security Administration in 2010. So, my sense from being in the community is that immigrants are contributors, and they're makers, not just takers,
Thank you. Thanks. We're going to go out to Raphael for another question, and please please, again, keep it brief. Imagine you're on a very short elevator ride, perhaps.
Yes, and actually, yes, we have at least 10 people, and we have like 30 minutes, so please, let's try to make it very brief. I get it.
I'm sorry, I didn't want to speak into your hand. Maritza Reyes, and I teach at the Florida A&M University College of Law. I'll be brief and speak quickly. Couple of things. I am a beneficiary of IRCA of 1986, what some call, amnesty. But under Senator Martinez's definition, I didn't break any law. I was a child, and my family came here because of failed U.S. foreign policy, which leads me into my question, because the fair speaker made mention of sort of disincentivizing or eliminating the reasons why people migrate. And I think that's something that gets lost in the immigration debate, is the reasons, right? NAFTA, for example, was one of the major reasons for a lot of the undocumented migration that we have from Mexico, because subsidized farmers, the small Mexican farmers could not compete with the subsidized American farmers. And then we have also the issue of arms supplied by the United States into Mexico that have to do with the drug trafficking and the demand for drugs in the United States, which is creating reasons why people are migrating from Mexico to the United States as well. So I want to know, are you considering the role of U.S. foreign policy in the migrations? And as a final point, also make that immigrants, documented and undocumented, are bringing not only, money in terms of investment, but money in terms of labor. And a lot of cities are now trying to bring immigrants to their cities because they know that the immigrant population means more jobs for U.S. citizens as well. So I want you to answer that question. Are you considering the role of U.S. foreign policy in the migrations, and whether we owe these people something because of that?
Look, I'm going to be very blunt and tell you that I am not blame America first type crowd. I do not believe that the role of American foreign policy, NAFTA, is to blame for migration. It may have been in an instance, in some very localized sort of way. I think NAFTA has been a tremendous boom to the Mexican economy overall. I think NAFTA has brought Mexico to where the Mexican people now are rising not only out of poverty, but are reaching middle class. And I think there's been tremendous benefits that have come both to the United States, Canada, and Mexico as a result of NAFTA. I'm a big believer in free trade agreements. I believe that the drug problem in Mexico is obviously the United States is the consumer, and I do know that through illegal means, the way you say it, it sounds like the U.S. government is sending arms to Mexico. That's not the case. But our gun laws have permitted for there to be some entry into Mexico of a lot of weapons, which I think is very bad for Mexico. We should do more to control that flow. But when you talk about it broadly speaking, I mean, I could say that I'm here because President Kennedy didn't have the guts to see the Bay of Pigs through. And if he had, Cuba would be different today. The reason Cuba has had a failed government for 50 years is the fault of the Cuban people, not the fault of the United States. I mean, the fact is that every country should take responsibility for themselves and for their people. I think the United States is a force for good in the world, not a force for evil. And I think when there is immigration that may be prompted by some dislocation here or there, I will not subscribe to the issue that this is part of America's problem. I think, we do a lot of good around the world, and immigration is a local problem and not a foreign policy problem.
Can I just add one thing? I agree with pretty much everything Senator Martinez said there. But in terms of NAFTA, whether you think it was a good treaty or a bad treaty, you can't just hold the United States responsible. There are 3 signatures on that treaty. It was President Clinton, I guess it was Brian Mulroney from Canada, and Ernesto Zedillo. Nobody was holding a gun to his head. How about holding him accountable? How about holding the Mexican elite accountable for whatever problems NAFTA may have caused? The attitude in Mexico for a long, long time has been, well, if you're unhappy here, there's the border, go. And that's really what has contributed to this problem. What we need, as Senator Martinez says, is to hold these governments, people in those countries need to hold their own governments accountable for the kind of social and economic conditions that have caused so many people to want to leave those countries.
I would like to, go ahead.
We can't ignore it because, I've seen cases where people are coming from Mexico in fear of their lives. It was either stay home and die or come to the United States, and they file for asylum seeking protection, and they have they're put through the ringer, more so than folks coming from other countries. So why is there that disparity between folks applying for asylum from Mexico versus other countries? You know, the burden of proof for those people are set much higher. And I think, you know, you just flip through the channels and, I mean, it's all the time on the news that the situation is really bad over there. So I think it's a problem, and I just want to recognize that I don't think we should ignore it, and it needs to be taken into consideration when crafting comprehensive immigration reform.
I just want to add, Mr. Ira, that not everybody that comes from the different countries come to the United States because we are happy with our country. Often we don't have the opportunities. I come from Guatemala, where it was the largest and the longest civil war happening there, financed mainly by the United States, which trunk my opportunities in my country to be able to provide for my family. Do I blame the United States for that? I just came to look for a better future. I think that we are here. We need to admit that, and we need to figure out how do we fix this immigration law that we have. I don't want to go back too much to that, but the bottom line is which is not unhappy immigrants that are being sent here. It's people that want to be productive to our countries and to this country as well.
Derek, I have a question that Senator Martinez has already raised, and that is, what policy, if not the pathway to citizenship that has been laid out in the Senate bill, what policy makes sense for the unauthorized immigrants in this country? What policy would best serve taxpayers in the U.S. economy?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I think we have a pretty good sense now that a mass amnesty is not the right answer. We've tried it once in 1986 when it was a matter of let's do this and make promises at the same time. So I think what a better path forward would be is to put in verifiable steps ahead of time, make sure it's working, that we have got the borders secure, that we are enforcing the laws as we ought to be, and then after you've been able to determine that that is working, then you can deal with the more difficult question of, well, what do we do with those who have been here for a longer amount of time? And we also, at that point, would have to recognize that not everyone in the 11 million is similarly situated or should be treated exactly the same either. Some have been here a lot longer. Others have a criminal record, for example, things like that. So you'd have to make very careful determinations at that point. But I think if we go down this path again of let's do another mass amnesty this time, we really are sending a signal. And there are millions of people in Mexico. There was I think it was a Gallup poll, it might have been a Pew poll recently, where they asked people in Mexico, would you go to the United States? About half said they didn't want to go. Of the remaining parts, I think it was 30% said that, or 20% said, 25% said they would go if they had, even without authorization, and 15 to 20% said they would not go without authorization. So that shows you there are millions of people in Mexico and every other country in the world that have made a conscious decision that I'm not going to break the law by going to the United States unlawfully. And I think it's really unfair to those people to grant an amnesty to those who decided to break the law.
But what do you do with them? They're here. What happens then? I mean, that's the part that I'd like to know. What is your proposal? I mean, there've been, the 06 wasn't right, 07 wasn't right, the one this year isn't right. What is right? What do you do with 11 million people in this country?
Interestingly enough, 2011, 2012 wasn't the right time. 2011, 2012 apparently wasn't the right time either, even though the president had overwhelming majorities in both houses of Congress, and he decided not to pursue it then. I don't see any reason that we have to do this right now when we've been waiting for many years. I think we instead need to reprioritize. We need to resequence this and to have those promises that were made in 1986. Let's see those be in place and working and verifiable before we go on to the more difficult and divisive question. And it'll also allow us to address some of the other concerns that have been raised already about the legal immigration system.
Let me give you 1,100 reasons why we need to do something today. 1,100 people are being deported today, being separated from their families. Do nothing is not do nothing. Do nothing means we're going to continue condemning our community for being separated from their families. Those kids that may not be able to see their parents when they come back from school because the parent was deported today. 400 people die crossing the border every year for seeking for a better life. And let's make no mistake, I think it hasn't been clear yet. None of us are asking for amnesty. What we're asking is for a process for the people to come out of the shadows of society and be full contributors to this country. Nobody's asking for amnesty. Amnesty will be wrong. Do you know that you can send your kid today to school, to kindergarten, and by the time those people who can apply to become citizens, your kid will be out of the high school then. This takes 13 years, the current law that is being approved in the Senate, and it's a similar time in the bill that is in the House. So there's no such a thing as amnesty. It's a price to pay. It's a very painful process to do it, and we are making sure that those people are going to be here are the people that have not committed any crimes. We have agreed to that. There's a lot of things that has been happening out there that is not amnesty.
Well, we can debate whether it's amnesty or not, but the bottom line is that the criteria for coming to the country can't just be, I want a better life. There are 7 billion people on this planet, most of whom would be better off here in the United States. But the reason we have immigration laws is not because we want to be mean and keep people out. It is because we understand that what might be in the individual interest of a person in another country seeking a better life here can have a detrimental effect on people who are in this country. If it affects your job, if it affects your ability to command a higher wage and do better for your family, if it affects your child's school, then we have a legitimate reason to say, look, we understand these are good people for the most part, but we have to set restrictions and we have to enforce those laws. And the way that you deal with it, people can poo-poo it if they want, whether you call it self-deportation or voluntary compliance, what we have to do is rely on the fact that illegal immigrants tend to be extremely rational people. They come here for very rational reasons. And if you eliminate those reasons, you will see that the numbers decline. And we have evidence of this. Back in 2006 and 2007, after President Bush failed in his attempt to get amnesty passed, Michael Chertoff looked into the camera and said, you want to see us do enforcement? We'll do enforcement. And they actually went out and did enforcement in the workplace. And guess what? For the first time, the number of people living in the country actually declined. Then you had the economic bubble burst in 2008. Unemployment was high. Fewer people came. More people voluntarily decided to go home. And it's irrelevant to people who are in this country illegally why the jobs aren't there, whether they're not there because the economy is tanked or because the government is holding the employers accountable. If the jobs aren't there, over time you will see fewer people come, more people go home. Not everybody's going to go home. They didn't all come yesterday. They're not all going home tomorrow. There's no law made by man or God that has 100% compliance, and this is not going to be the exception. But we don't have to choose between the two extremes of mass deportations, which nobody is suggesting that we ought to do, or mass capitulation in the form of amnesty. What we need to do is enforce our immigration laws the same way that we enforce all civil laws. When the Highway Patrol wants to enforce the speed limit, they don't pull over everybody who's doing 61 miles an hour. What they do is they pull over a few people. You're cruising along at 80 miles an hour. You take your foot off the gas. You have to rely on the fact that people respond rationally to the rational signals we send.
We cannot compare the separation of families and leaving kids behind with a ticket that you can pay in any court. That is not the right way to approach this. We need to look at this as a human issue. It's something that America has always valued, the family. And quite frankly, the way you describe it is like a simple ticket, describes the immigrant community, and it's not. I can tell you, I have seen parents being separated from their families, and quite frankly, we have a lot of orphan children, U.S. citizens.
Why don't they take their kids with them?
They are citizens of this country. How do we deal with the people that is already here? I don't think you're giving us a solution. You're just giving us more of the problem that we have. And quite frankly, we all know the immigration system is broken and we need to fix it. And that is what we elect people to do, and we expect them to take leadership.
I'm going to call a truce on this particular question so we can get one more from Rafael.
Okay, I'm here. Oh my God. Okay.
Got there?
And let's
Please
keep
don't
it brief.
kill the guy with the microphone. I need to go back and wrap up the edition of El Sentinel this week. We have a lot of people, but I have this lady here. Please, the time is running out, so let's try to be brief.
Thank you so very much. My name is Lourdes Perez Ramirez, and I am from Puerto Rico. And my question today is for you guys, for all of you here. Mr. Ira said a very interesting thing, and that's it. Let's select who comes here, who can help our our country. And I think that's a very great suggestion if you want to do like Hitler. Let's select who we want to be like us, who the people we want. And that's the same mindset that is segregating our schools nowadays, okay? The minority, mostly Hispanics, are going to very poor public school, unfunded, unequipped, and the very best, usually white and Asian, are going to charter schools and private schools, okay?
All right, so the issue, and Ira addressed it before, is whether or not we should put a priority in the immigration system, in our immigration laws, on people who can, who are deemed as adding something to the economy, meeting a need in the economy. Does anyone else have strong feelings on that?
I mean, if we're going to go to that system, I probably wouldn't be here in front of you. I was a janitor when I came to this country. Someone that went to school in my country. I finished my high school, and thanks to the great opportunity that this country had given me, I had the pleasure to be in front of all of you. So I just think that we need to be very careful how are we going to start selecting. Quite frankly, I think that if we were to fix the system, there's ways that we can do it in a way that is rational, that is humane, and that is also with the values of this country.
Well, the 07 bill that I worked on and was proposing to the Senate, by the way, it came within 8 votes of passing, which is a shame that it didn't get over with at that point, and we're still pending with all of this. But anyway, it had a blend of the two. It had family, a migration for the future flow, but it also had a point system similar to what Canada uses. I think every country around the world uses a system in its self-interest of what do we want from immigrants that come into this country. And I think in that regard, the United States is unique, which is what makes us unique in some ways. So I think a blend of the two would be the way to go, which is a blend of, for instance, in the high technology or different areas of our economy where there are needs, that would be one element, and the other one would be family. Keeping the family to extremes like we do today, I think, is also counterproductive. In other words, the nuclear family, obviously, and some other family related to that nuclear family as defined by us Latinos, which may be abuela, la tía. But, at some point, I got family in a lot of places I didn't know I had. So, the family can be a little crazy when it comes to us. But I think if we keep it to a sensible level of family and then have a point system or some other system to decide what are the economic needs of our country, I think that's the best way to go forward. This is good for the country, but it also gives people an opportunity.
I just want to say, sounds like we agree that the system is indeed broken. So if not now, when?
I think we have time just for one more question, unfortunately.
Okay, Julio. Then I'm going to run for my life, so maybe Mike is mine.
My name is Julio Rochas. I get to wrap it up. Statement. My father, he came here legally, and he was a dishwasher. He put 4 of us through college, and I've seen doctors who come legally here from another country, and just because not speaking the language, they do take jobs that individuals who have a bachelor and that were born here won't take. So we need janitors and dishwashers. No restaurant can run without dishes that are clean. So we need those people. I sit on the National Society of Hispanic MBAs on the national board. I can assure you that top Fortune 50 companies need individuals that are concentrated in STEM. As my research tells me that individuals do come here illegally, some students on visas. We educate them at MIT, Harvard, Yale, and then we ship them out. Are you guys in favor of STEM visas to keep that talent that we are educating and we're outsourcing them to other countries to develop companies, innovation, and businesses?
Yes, very much so. I think that's critically important. That would be a good way to reform the legal immigration system would be to increase that. And I appreciate what you were saying about dishwashers at restaurants and people that pick produce in the fields. And these are all honorable jobs. In fact, they're doing something that helps all of us. And I don't think we do ourselves a lot of favors by using rhetoric like jobs that Americans won't do or something like that. I think that's really disrespectful. And I think it's many times wrong, because a lot of times natives are majority in a lot of these occupations that sometimes people point to. And labor in and of itself is a noble thing. It's a good thing to do, to serve your neighbor. And so I think culturally we could use some change in that area too. And we're not the kind of place where we have to import people to do jobs we don't want to do. That just really strikes me as really condescending and wrong on many levels.
Yeah. Can I just say that there are very few jobs that Americans won't do. There are wages and working conditions that Americans won't accept and shouldn't be forced to accept. And in a lot of industries, and agriculture being one of them, a lot of crops that are still picked by hand in the United States are picked by machines overseas. We've got to provide the incentives for the big growers to invest in the mechanization that would make it much more efficient, much more cost-effective over the long term. And in terms of, STEM workers, first of all, there's no evidence that we have a shortage of STEM workers here in the United States. We have a lot of people who have trained in those fields who can't find employment in those fields. But to the extent that we are going to reform our system from top to bottom, and we determine that as a nation we need more people in those fields, then we should make that part of the priority in the selection process. All we are doing at this point is creating these new add-ons to a system that I think everybody agrees is broken. So, simply take, well, this industry wants, 50,000 workers and that industry wants it. We can do this endlessly. What we have to do is go back to square one and say, this is what we need. We need to define what the objective of our immigration policy is and design a system that meets those objectives.
Well, that's going to be the last word. We are approaching our deadline when we promised you all that you'd be free to get on with your day. I'd like to say a special thank you to our panel members, and particularly the ones who came from out of town to be with us today. We have some travelers on the panel. Derek Morgan came from Washington. Ira Melman came from Seattle, and Ben Monteroso came from Los Angeles. Of course, we appreciate Senator Martinez and Melissa joining us as well.
I just want to say thank you. Gracias a todos por estar aquí. It was a wonderful debate. I think this is a great opportunity also for networking. Thanks to all, also candidates running for public office that are here. I know immigration is going to be a big issue, and I'm very happy to see some of you guys here with us. Thank you so much. Gracias a todos.